Super Mario Sunshine has always felt like the black sheep of the Mario series to me. Not because it's outright bad or anything. In fact, I'd probably tie it with Galaxy as my favorite 3D Mario depending on the day, but I think it acts as a unique time capsule of what Mario was at the time. I mean, just look how gangster Mario looks on the box art, that shit screams early 2000s. Sunshine was the first mainline Mario game to come out after Mario 64, which I can only imagine put a lot of pressure on the dev team. How do you follow up on one of, if not arguably the most influential game of all time? A game that not only shaped 3D gaming as we know it today, but also the collectathon genre. In a lot of ways, Sunshine succeeds at doing just that, innovating on Mario 64's foundation through its unique approach to level design and free-flowing platforming mechanics, while ironing out a few of 64's rougher edges. At other times, however, it finds itself falling short of its predecessor by foregoing a lot of the key aspects that made 64 so groundbreaking and approachable even today. It's because of these shortcomings that Sunshine has a bit of a mixed reception, some of which is deserved, some of which I feel is a little overblown. I've played Sunshine a lot over the years. I tend to find myself coming back to it every year or two, so it's a game I'd say I've become pretty familiar with. And it was during my most recent playthrough that I've came to realize what exactly draws me to this game year after year. So today, I want to take a moment and explain why Sunshine is so special to me. The game is far from perfect, but in a way, that's exactly what I think makes it special. One of the main things that immediately sticks out about Sunshine is its premise. It has one of my favorite scenarios and settings of any Mario game. Mario and Peach are on vacation at the luxurious Isle Delfino. I guess they didn't even bother to invite Luigi, which is kinda messed up. Dude literally just saved your life like a week ago, but whatever. Upon landing, Mario is confronted with his strongest enemy yet, the government. He's arrested and tried for the crime of allegedly polluting the island with paint and graffiti, while also stealing the island's shine sprites. Without even an opportunity to defend himself, he's tasked by the island's residents with cleaning up the pollution and returning the shine sprites to the plaza, and isn't allowed to leave until he completes his task. What I like so much about this setup is how it almost immediately subverts the calm, relaxing atmosphere you'd come to expect from an island resort. Despite it becoming obvious that Mario isn't the one that committed these atrocities as early as the opening cutscene, the sense of unease is ever present as you explore Isle Delfino. There are wanted posters for Mario plastered on seemingly every wall in the plaza, and the townsfolk are extremely mean to Mario, often extorting him for his help in their troubles or outright insulting him. These assholes even have the audacity to hold the shine sprites that are supposedly so important to the island hostage. Not only are you going to subject me to a bogus court trial that's obviously rigged in your favor, but you're also going to willingly hurt your own society's well-being in the process? These guys are jerks! What do you have to say for yourself? Obviously, this is all a little tongue-in-cheek. This is a Mario game after all, so no one goes beyond childish insults or passive-aggressiveness. But I think it all does a good job of selling a particular mood and putting the player in Mario's big brown shoes. You're unable to truly relax while Shadow Mario is on the loose, which motivates you to take him down as soon as possible so you can clear Mario's name and really start enjoying his vacation. Something I've always appreciated about Isle Delfino as a setting is how lived in and interconnected it feels. Like, look at Mario 64 for example. Peach's castle is a wonderful hub that manages to feel mysterious and whimsical while still making some amount of logical sense. Its simplicity also allows players not used to moving in a 3D environment get a grip with the controls before jumping into the game proper, which is genius considering 64's release marking a shift in both the genre and gaming as a whole. But the levels themselves are pretty disconnected, being separated by literal paintings and disconnected rooms. Some levels share visual themes, but otherwise they're pretty disconnected from each other. Which isn't a bad thing, mind you. It works for the game's more open and loose progression structure, and it's something every other 3D Mario game would adopt as well, each game having its own hub or world map that leads to different parts of that particular game's world. It allows for seamless visual variety in the game's levels since you aren't stuck in one physical location, and it lets you transition into those various themes without breaking immersion. Sunshine, however, takes a different approach. The game takes place on one island, and while that might seem rather limiting at first glance, the game still manages to make each location distinct from one another. No two levels feel the same, which is impressive considering they all share a similar theme. I love the way this game leans into its world building. Since everything is part of one physical landmass, you're occasionally able to see different levels in the distance as you're exploring another of the game's locations. I've always liked how organic the levels in Sunshine feel. Mario 64's levels have always felt a little more gamey to me, with floating platforms everywhere and the levels generally being more blocky and obstacle course oriented in nature. This is in no way a knock to the game's level design, mind you. It makes sense considering the game's time period. Sunshine still has moments like this here and there with things like the bonus levels and athletic courses, but I've always liked that each main location feels like it has a defined purpose in Isle Delfino. Delfino Plaza is the main hub for both the island's inhabitants and tourists alike, with vendors and attractions like the Shine Gate or boat tours decorating its streets and waterways. Rico Harbor acts as the main docking station for the island ships, Pina Park hosts an amusement park with tons of thrill-seeking attractions, and Giant Missiles. The island has multiple beaches to relax on, ancient ruins to discover and explore, rural villages to sightsee, and a hotel with a casino where you can gamble away your stress like any healthy adult. While the game is technically lacking in sheer visual variety compared to other games in the series, it still manages to nail that tropical resort aesthetic in a way that's almost solely unique to it, while also making sure that every level feels distinct. There's no two levels in this game that look too similar to one another. Even the two beach levels manage to feel completely different by being set at different times of day. People like to point to specific levels from games that give off that special summer vibe, but Mario Sunshine is one of those few games that I feel is able to capture that vibe throughout the entirety of its runtime. Even though the levels are still separated by warp gates and pipes, they still manage to feel interconnected in a way that no other Mario game has been able to capture since. What further contributes to this feeling of cohesion is that the level design is a lot more grounded than most other games in the series. Outside of a few bonus levels that are reminiscent of your standard platforming obstacle courses, the level design manages to feel really natural. By that, I mean the environments are more like real locations instead of obstacle courses made for the player to navigate. Platforming challenges are often seamlessly built into the environment in a naturalistic way. My favorite example of this are the scaffoldings in Rico Harbor that allow for fun and engaging platforming sections, while still feeling like believable parts of the environment. That's not to say Sunshine is lacking in its more fantastical elements. They're still around here and there in levels like the hotel where you constantly jump between floors battling ghosts, or in Noki Bay with the hidden ruins you can unveil by spraying sections of the walls. But even these manage to feel right at home in this game's setting. This facet of the game's level design means there's often more than one way to get to a specific objective outside of the intended one. That's often the case for other games in the series too, but I found it more fun to experiment here than in a game like Galaxy that's pretty rigid with its level design. Episode 3 of Pianta Village is one of my favorite examples of this. This level sees the mountainside village overrun with orange goop that acts as lava, and at the start of the level your flood pack is taken away from you. So in order to beat the level, you have to navigate the area without it, while avoiding the Taco Bell hot sauce splattered everywhere. You could take the boring way underneath the village, or you can go around the side and jump on these trees, and use a well-placed spin jump to skip the entire thing. Or barely miss it and die if you suck like I do. There's tons of examples like this throughout the entire game, and it's moments like these that make Sunshine so memorable to me. The more fantastical settings of games like Mario 64 and Galaxy work wonders for those games, and even those games still have their moments where you can take unintended shortcuts. But I've always found that Sunshine is the best at this approach to level design. I always have a blast finding new and inventive ways to navigate these environments whenever I replay the game, which is only made more engaging by the game's incredible platforming mechanics. When following up one of the most influential games of all time, how do you approach it from a gameplay perspective? Mario 64's movement can be a little clunky by today's standards, but it's remarkable how fluid and responsive it is considering it was their first attempt. So when it comes time to make a sequel, do you choose to refine what was already there, or do you go in a completely different direction? In Sunshine's case, Nintendo decided to do a little bit of both. In terms of Mario's base moveset, he retains a lot of the moves you'd expect him to. He's still got the triple jump, a ground pound, and a dive. Both the ability to attack enemies and the long jump are gone, but in their place are a couple new platforming options. You can now continually hop while sliding to maintain your momentum, and new to this game is the spin jump, which is done by spinning the stick before jumping. If done right, this move can give you some insane air and distance, and it's one of my favorite skills to use during tricky platforming sections. The biggest addition to Mario's moveset though is the Flood. He's this game's main gimmick, so to speak. Mario has this water pack on his back for the entire game that allows him to do a couple of different things depending on the nozzle you have equipped. Flood's default mode is the spray nozzle. It pretty much does what you'd expect it to. It sprays water. Riveting. With the spray nozzle you can do a couple of different things. You can clean the paint and graffiti that's been scattered across the island, spray various landmarks for goodies, terrorize civilians. For what seems like such a simple concept, the spray nozzle still manages to have a small amount of depth to it. Thanks to the pressure-sensitive analog triggers on the GameCube controller, the utility of the nozzle can change slightly depending on how far you push down the trigger. Pushing it down a little bit allows you to spray water while moving, while holding down the trigger will lock you in place, giving you more control over where you spray your water. Pressing the A button as soon as you start to spray water results in this wider shotgun blast, which I've always really liked for some reason. It's weirdly fun to blast away a bunch of paint at once, or to cheese these paint monster mini-bosses with it. My favorite thing to do with this spray nozzle is to dive into wet patches on the ground, which results in Mario sliding way further and faster, at the cost of losing some control over your turning. You can technically do this near any water source, but Flood makes it easier since he's always on your back. Mario can reach some insane speeds with this slide, and it's a lot of fun to play around with once you get good at it, as long as you don't slam into a wall at Mach 4. A lot of this stuff with the spray nozzle is pretty versatile, which makes it really fun to mess around with, while making mini-bosses like the countless Shadow Mario chases much more engaging. Flood's main utility comes from the other three nozzles you can switch between. The hover nozzle is easily the most useful out of the three, which makes sense as it's the one you always spawn with alongside the spray nozzle. The hover nozzle does exactly what the name suggests. It turns Flood into a jetpack and allows you to hover for a short time. What seems like a really simple addition really opens up Mario's moveset. Not only does it allow for small corrections if you happen to misjudge a jump or slip off a platform, but in the right hands it can grant you some serious distance. This single addition to the game is the thing that makes charting your own path through a level so engaging. That little bit of extra airtime allows you to get to places you wouldn't be able to get to otherwise. With just a little bit of planning, you can skip a lot of sections outright if you know what you're doing, which makes exploring and experimenting all that more rewarding. The other two nozzles aren't quite as impactful, but they still add a bit to the experience. The rocket nozzle shoots you straight up into the air, which can be useful for some sections, but Sunshine is pretty lacking in verticality in its platforming, so in most cases I'd rather have the hover nozzle. The turbo nozzle continuously blasts water behind Mario, making him run at super speed. This one is pretty situational if I'm going to be honest. A lot of Sunshine's levels aren't really built with the speed it gives you in mind, so outside of a few missions that are built around it, I don't find myself using it that often, mainly only for sections that outright require it. The only downside to these three nozzles is that you can only have one equipped at a time, which sort of limits the use cases for them. I understand needing to have some kind of limiter, because being able to shoot upwards with the rocket nozzle especially could break a lot of the platforming sections. But since you have to go out of your way to find and switch nozzles whenever you need a particular one, makes the rocket and turbo nozzles pretty situational. The hover nozzle is so essential to this game's platforming loop that I have a hard time justifying switching it out for something unless I absolutely have to. The game already limits what nozzles are available in a given episode, and given how linear the game already is, I think they could have gotten away with letting you toggle between them at will once you find them in a stage. The way it works now is fine as is, I just think having access to all of them could have given the latter two a few more use cases. What I really enjoy about Flood is that it pushes the player to fully interact with every level. The spray nozzle can be used to unveil a lot of hidden goodies pretty much everywhere, from coins, fruit, trees, even whole shine sprites. This works to keep the player alert and pushes them to spray as much as possible to reveal secrets. And while those secrets can be a little obtuse at times, I find it rewarding to reveal all these hidden goodies just by playing around. The level design really benefits from Flood's inclusion. I've always liked the few level objects that have unique interactions with Flood, like the tightropes for example. By hanging on a tightrope and using the spray nozzle, you can make Mario spin around it and gain a ton of speed, and by jumping at the right time you can launch him across the level. Admittedly, this isn't used very often. The only place I can think it's outright useful is this line of coins in Gelato Beach. But it's stuff like this that I think makes Sunshine stages so fun to mess around in. By the same token, the movement nozzles add an extra layer to the platforming that's unique to Sunshine, It adds a layer of freedom to the more naturalistic level design that opens up tons of exploration opportunities. According to one of the game's producers, Shigeru Miyamoto, this aspect of Flood really changed how they approach level design for this game. In an interview with Nintendo Dream, he states, "If you become good at using all the different movements in Mario Sunshine, you can reach most areas. It's so much fun to find your own personal way through the levels like this. You can just enjoy playing freely." At the same time, because there's so many ways for players to get through the levels now, it made setting the difficulty very hard for us. If someone tells you, "Go over there," you might use your abilities and take a completely unexpected path. When we saw things like that, we could have put a wall or other obstacle to block that way, but as much as possible we tried not to impede players. It's small additions like this that really breathe life into Sunshine's level design. Flood is powerful, but he never feels outright broken. For example, Flood has a natural limiter in the form of his water tank. Everything you do consumes a certain amount of water, with stronger abilities like the shotgun blast or turbo nozzle using up more water. This adds a resource management aspect of Flood that works to limit how much he can be abused. The water tank can be refilled in any body of water, but there are some sections that you don't have any readily available, so you have to manage your water usage to ensure you don't run out in a bad spot. It's small mechanics like this that all join together to make Flood a really engaging tool for the player, and he adds a unique flair to Mario Sunshine's platforming. The last major gameplay mechanic is Yoshi, making his first playable 3D appearance. About halfway through the game you unlock a mountable Yoshi, and I'm not really sure on how I feel about him. To even ride him, you have to bring him a fruit that he's craving, which can be annoying at worst and a neat puzzle at best, since some levels will hide the fruit he wants, so you have to find it before you can progress. On top of that, the fruit will influence the color of your Yoshi, which is actually used in a couple of stages as another puzzle. This Yoshi is a product of Bowser Jr.'s paintbrush, so it will dissolve in bodies of water. Except for this one for some reason. It must be filled with Dasani or something. This sort of limits where you can take Yoshi, which makes sense I guess considering how OP he is, but I don't know, I find it a little disappointing. On paper, Yoshi is really fun to play as. Obviously he has his hover ability, but he can also naturally jump way higher than Mario. Good lord, look at him go. Instead of spraying water, he sprays juice at everyone, which while disgusting, does actually have a unique gameplay purpose. When you spray an enemy with Yoshi juice, it'll turn into a platform, and that platform will behave differently depending on the color of your Yoshi. For example, you can make the platform move up, forward, or make it remain stationary. The only real downside to Yoshi is that he's pretty situational. He can do a lot of unique things. He can eat butterflies and bees to turn them into coins, and he has these special barriers that can only be dissolved with Yoshi juice. But most of those things are only really useful if you're going for 100% completion. Otherwise, he's only used in a few select missions. You use him in the hotel to eat ghosts blocking your path, and in Peanut Park you use him as a sacrificial lamb to enter Yoshi Heaven. But outside of that, he doesn't have that many unique gameplay purposes, which I guess in a sense is neat because it makes him more like a traditional power-up, but not being able to touch water on a tropical island resort really limits his usefulness. Again, he is really fun to play with, and obviously I'm a pretty big Yoshi enjoyer, but I wish there was more sections that took advantage of his unique properties to make him really stand out. Otherwise, he's pretty superfluous in his first major 3D appearance. If you were to ask someone what Sunshine's most obvious flaw is, I think most people would tell you that the game has a lot of jank, which isn't entirely inaccurate. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this game is a little rushed. The game was originally revealed at Space World 2001, and even though the game was only a year out from release, it looked almost completely different from what we would eventually get. Even trailers from the year the game came out have sections of completely different level design. So as you can probably imagine, the game at times can feel a little off. It's still pretty solid, all things considered. If this is the worst Mario games get, I'd say we've got a pretty good track record. But there's still a lot more glitches than you might expect from a Nintendo product. Mario 64 also has its fair share of glitches, but I think it's fair to say that you won't encounter a majority of them on a normal playthrough. With Sunshine though, you're bound to clip through at least one or two objects in a normal playthrough. This isn't entirely a bad thing though, since like Mario 64 there are a handful of glitches that are fun to play around with. There's a lot of sections in this game where you can strategically phase through things to make substantial progress. I could do this boring panel puzzle in the casino that randomly freaks out due to the game's wonky water physics, Or I could just clip through the top of the curtain and get to the pipe that way. I could take a slow ride on these boats with Yoshi to get to the secret dirty lake level, or I could just clip through this window and put myself under the ocean and skip the entire thing. Oh look, I guess Yoshi can swim. While some glitches can be pretty annoying, others can be pretty fun to play with. And I don't know, maybe this is just a me thing, but I think it gives the game this certain kind of charm. Kinda like messing around with the glitches in Sonic 06, if that makes any sense, though obviously to a less extreme degree. I think this jank is pretty easy to see with the game's physics. I don't really know how to explain it, but Sunshine Mario is both really heavy and really light at the same time. Normally it's not too much of an issue since you have FLUDD with you to do minor course corrections, but there's a handful of levels where FLUDD is taken away from you that can be a little hard to adjust to. Positioning is really important in Mario Sunshine. It's probably the most important factor when it comes to platforming. One wrong move will make you fall off a platform, often in ways that don't always feel intentional. I think this is the most obvious with the spin jump. It definitely has the potential to be your greatest ally in terms of traditional platforming, but in practice it can be pretty finicky. Because you have to spin the control stick before using it, sometimes the momentum you get from it is inconsistent, depending on when you perform the jump, meaning it can feel like a coin flip whether or not you get the distance you were expecting from it, which in the worst case scenario will result in your death, especially in these cases where you don't have FLUDD to catch yourself. Despite all the weirdness Sunshine has, I think it's pretty easy to adjust to over the course of the game. While it can be annoying with things like not being able to hover out of a dive, occasionally missing your mark with a jump, or sometimes clipping through something you didn't mean to, it's more than made up for with Mario's expressive base moveset and the versatility of the FLUDD. And in some cases, you can even use jankiness to your advantage, which is so much fun. While I think you could argue Sunshine manages to successfully build off Mario 64 and its mechanics and level design, one thing that most would agree took a pretty big hit is the game's structure. On paper, it's structured similarly to Mario 64. You collect shine sprites to unlock more of the hub, leading you to more levels and eventually the final boss. But when you take a step back and look at both games, there's a few key differences that set Sunshine apart from its predecessor. In Mario 64, each level is more or less an open sandbox. While you can select specific stars upon entering a level, you aren't necessarily locked to any one specific objective. If you know where a star is, or happen to stumble upon it while exploring, you're able to collect it right then and there. In this sense, the star selection screen acts as more of a hint screen rather than a level select. There are a handful of stars that require you to select them to spawn the correct enemies or obstacles, but overall the game is very lax and open with its objectives. At first glance, Mario Sunshine keeps this foundation, but in practice it's much more linear than its predecessor for a couple of different reasons. The biggest difference is that only one shine sprite will be active at any given time, corresponding to the episode you select when entering a level. Now, despite what you might think at first, I don't think this is inherently a bad change. This new episode structure gives each world a more streamlined, linear progression, and allows each objective to be more in-depth. Each episode will often significantly change level design and object placement, and it gives each area this greater sense of cohesion. Most levels now try to tell their own mini-story. For example, when you first enter Noki Bay, you learn that the water has been contaminated with some sort of poison, and the locals task you with figuring out how to cleanse it. So first you examine the water's source at the top of the waterfall, then you learn how to dive underwater with the fishbowl helmet, before then taking on the giant eel in the water's depths that's responsible for polluting the water with his disgusting teeth. In Serena Beach, you explore a haunted hotel full of ghosts, eventually confronting the source under the casino by battling King Boo to get rid of them. While not every single episode is directly connected to each other in a narrative sense, they still often manage to build off each other mechanically. Like in Rico Harbor, where you partake in a blooper surfing obstacle course as a tutorial for the blooper surfing mechanic, before using it again later for a red coin mission. Early on in Gelato Beach's levels, you knock this giant wiggler off of his comfy resting spot, only for him to rightfully show back up pissed a few missions later. Pianta Village has a couple of different missions where you throw overheated chain chomps into water, you know, that kind of stuff. In this sense, every episode is just that, a small part of a greater journey in each of the game's levels. Having said that, there are still a couple of different ways to get some miscellaneous shines here and there. Some levels house one or two secret shines that can be found regardless of the episode. Some are as simple as getting a faster time in blooper surfing, Others are a little more hidden and will require you to search for them. Like in Mario 64, there's also a shine for getting 100 coins in a stage, although this can be a little annoying at times since some episodes just don't have 100 coins. Because fuck you. You can return to the athletic courses after beating them to play them again with Flood, and doing so lets you attempt a red coin challenge for another shine. You can get the last remaining shines through a new collectible exclusive to Sunshine, the blue coins. These are probably Sunshine's most controversial feature. Blue coins are these special coins that are hidden in various locations. Some are out in the open, while others are hidden in walls, plants, beehives, the moon. In Delfino Plaza, you can go to this shop and trade in 10 coins for 1 shine. There's 240 blue coins in the game, totaling 24 shine sprites you can get from turning them in. Which would be fine if finding them wasn't a pain in the ass. There's no way to track blue coins in-game. The most you get is this little tally on the total screen, which isn't very helpful. I'd say about 70% of the blue coins are pretty easy to find on your own. As long as you're paying attention and spraying everything in sight, they're pretty easy to uncover. The problem arises when trying to get that last 30%. For some reason, the devs thought it would be funny if some blue coins just didn't spawn in certain episodes. In theory, this makes sense. Some episodes have unique level design and set pieces, so it makes sense that a few would be exclusive to those instances. However, a couple of them don't fit that description and are just exclusive for no reason, which makes them really annoying to find. Again, you get one by spraying the moon. Why would you think to do that? Because a majority of them are accessible in most episodes, not having any kind of tracker makes finding the last 5 or so in any given level really annoying, because you don't know if you're just missing it or if the blue coin just doesn't exist in that particular episode. This makes 100%ing the game a lot more annoying than it needs to be. Especially in areas like Noki Bay that have a bunch of coins hidden in cracks and crevices, it's really hard to keep a mental note of which places you've cleaned out. But in a normal playthrough, I think they're a pretty good addition. They allow you to get a few extra shines just by going a little out of your way. It's a neat multitasking process that I personally find pretty enjoyable. So in practice, there are still a lot of chances to get shine sprites outside of the main episodes. It might not be as open as Mario 64, but there's still at least some way to progress outside of the main stages. Is what I would say if I wasn't a liar. See, there's one big, glaring flaw in going after any shine that's not part of a main episode. Collecting any of them is a waste of time. See, unlike Mario 64 where you progress by collecting a specific amount of stars to unlock the next sealed door, in Sunshine there are no explicit shine requirements. To unlock the final boss, all you have to do is defeat Shadow Mario in every stage. The only problem is that he's located in the same episode in every level, Episode 7. Each level only has 8, by the way. As we've established, you aren't able to get shines out of order outside of a few very specific glitches, so the only thing you outright have to do is go through episodes 1 through 7 of every level to get to the final boss. This means if you aren't going for 100% completion, anything you do outside of that is essentially a waste of time, since it doesn't lead to any main story progression. Episode 8 in every level? Worthless. Blue coins? Not in this economy. Bonus levels? Drown in the poison lake. In a practical sense, the only shines that matter are the ones you get from doing the main episodes, which results in a pretty small amount of mandatory collectibles for a Mario game. Including the shine you get from the airstrip tutorial, you only need a total of 50 shines to reach the final boss, less than half of the total amount in the entire game. This progression structure makes the game fairly rigid. Part of what makes Mario 64 so approachable is that you're able to route your own path through Peach's castle. Outside of getting any one star in Bob-omb Battlefield, you can theoretically beat any combination of levels to reach the final boss. As long as you reach that 70-star threshold, it doesn't matter what levels you play and which ones you skip. It allows for players who aren't as good at the game to focus on easier stars and still have enough to beat the game. And it also allows for a layer of personalization in every playthrough because you can choose what levels to go to and when. In that sense, every star has value up until that 70-star threshold, because any one of them can theoretically be used to progress. It's one of those things that makes even casual speedrunning of Mario 64 so fun. There's so many different routes that can be better or worse depending on the person and their skill level. In Mario Sunshine, you're forced to play 90% of every stage, forced to beat Shadow Mario in Episode 7 of every level, forced to play the game in a very specific way to reach the credits. Mario Sunshine strips away the liberating freedom provided by Mario 64. and in the process devalues over half of the game's collectibles. But realistically, how much does that really matter? Yes, on paper it does kinda suck that the game isn't as open or freeform as Mario 64, but in execution, I don't think that's entirely a bad thing. This more rigid progression structure does lead to more intrinsically designed episode scenarios, and lends themselves to a more natural sense of progression. One could argue that doing anything outside of the main levels is a waste of time if you're not going for 100%, but isn't that the case for most games? Even in Mario 64's case, if someone chooses to go for any stars after reaching that 70-star threshold, is it really a waste of time if you're having fun playing those levels? I find that especially recently, there's been an obsession with optimizing the way we play games, which I feel can severely hurt the enjoyment of a game as a whole. In a sense, I get it. Some games can be pretty long, and we don't want to necessarily waste time if we don't have to. But I find this focus on beating a game as fast and efficiently as possible before quickly moving on to the next game on the list does a disservice to a lot of these experiences. I don't think I know many people who strictly only play the required content in a game without touching any of the side content at all. Imagine if you went on vacation and your significant other planned out a strict itinerary before you even arrived at your destination, and forced you to follow it even if you found something else that looked cool. Sorry babe, we can't go to the amusement park. We've already committed to building sand sculptures on the beach today. While yeah, you might have fun doing only the stuff you came prepared to do, that extra impromptu stuff could be just as, if not more, fun. While a good chunk of sunshine may be optional, that doesn't mean that extra content isn't worthwhile. A lot of people will play a game until they're satisfied and then put it down, regardless of whether they fully complete it or not. So even if a piece of content is optional, it still has value as long as it's fun. The optional stuff still has the potential to add a lot to Sunshine. The bonus levels hidden in Delfino Plaza are a lot of fun, for example. They tend to lean into that more wackier Mario aesthetic the rest of the game lacks, like putting Mario in a giant pachinko machine, or on a lily pad atop a poison river that slowly decays your safety net, adding a looming sense of urgency to the stage. They offer challenges you don't really get in the main levels, which makes them worth playing in my opinion. Delfino Plaza has a ton of hidden shines to find that all make use of some ability that Mario learns, and it's rewarding to explore and find all of them. Even the blue coins can potentially add a lot to these stages. For example, I really like the ones that are hidden in opposing graffiti arts on walls across the levels from each other. Getting from point A to point B before time expires is a lot of fun. It lets you make use of stuff like that water slide, for example. Given how obtuse a number of these things are, I totally get if they're not someone's cup of tea. But as someone that loves going for 100% in these games, being rewarded for poking around in areas that seem suspicious is pretty fulfilling, even if that reward is essentially filler for the shine count. The silver lining about most of this being optional is that if you don't feel the need to engage with it, you don't have to in order to progress. It allows you to engage with the stuff you find value in, while not worrying about the things you don't find appealing. But personally, I believe this bonus stuff does add a lot to Sunshine as a whole, and I think you're doing yourself a tiny disservice by neglecting it completely. I think Super Mario Sunshine will continue to stand out among the countless array of Mario games. In a lot of ways, it's a product of its time. It was made at a time where Nintendo really couldn't afford to not have a Mario game after the lackluster launch of the GameCube, and that rush design philosophy unfortunately shines through in a lot of areas. From countless bugs, to remnants of unfinished ideas littered all over Isle Delfino, it's clear that a lot of ideas had to be compromised to get the game out in a quicker fashion. But despite that, it still manages to feel cohesive, in a way I'd argue no other Mario game has managed to since. Isle Delfino lives like a living, breathing location, strengthened by the game's new episode format that allows levels to change dynamically over the course of their runtime. While some might see the new level structure as a step down from the freeform nature of Mario 64, I think it adds a lot to the game by strengthening the potential for world building. Mechanics like the blue coins can be seen as annoying and overly complicated when taken as a whole, but individually, I think a lot of them add a good bit to each location, offering unique challenges to overcome while rewarding exploration, experimentation, and talking to various NPCs. Super Mario Sunshine is far from perfect. It's buggy, janky, and quite frankly a mess in a lot of areas. But despite that, I can't help but love it to death. What it might lack in polish is more than made up for with earnesty. There's love poured into every inch of this game, I learn about some new quirk every time I replay it, whether that's an intentional design decision that usually goes unnoticed, or some wacky oversight people have found over the years. It's this imperfect charm that constantly brings me back to this game year after year. It's one of those few games that manages to capture that special summer feeling throughout the entirety of its runtime. And in a way, it also manages to perfectly capture that exciting feeling of a vacation. Not every vacation needs to be meticulously planned out ahead of time to be enjoyed to its fullest. Sometimes, it can be just as fun to go with the flow and enjoy the ride.
The vacation starts now.